Now, yesterday we heard the tragic news that 3 American troops had been killed and as many as 34 injured in a drone attack on an army base near the Jordan-Syria border. The attack is believed to have happened at an army outpost called Tower 22 in northeast Jordan. And the US says Iranian-backed radical militants are responsible. How is Joe Biden going to handle this, Josh? Because there are politicians calling for a response, an armed response against Iran. I'm sure he doesn't want to be involved in another war in the Middle East. How is he going to respond to this? Because he can't ignore it.
No, he literally cannot ignore it. So here's the predicament that Joe Biden finds himself in, is that he wishes more than anything that the U.S. not get involved into another conflict, especially in the Middle East, which is a region of the world that Barack Obama and Joe Biden have tried so hard to get America out of. Ironically, their means of doing so is to embolden one of our worst enemies, the Islamic Republic of Iran, but we can kind of hold that to aside for now. But he is trying so hard, whatever his feelings about the Iranian mullahcracy may be, he's trying so hard to get America not involved in another war. Here's the problem, Rhea. The problem is that the region is on fire right now. It's not just Gaza. Hezbollah on Israel's northern boundary is raining in rockets. I was actually just in Israel earlier this month. I didn't realize how bad it is in the Israeli north on the Lebanese border until I spoke with people. There are 100,000 Israelis who have not lived in their homes up north near Lebanon for 3.5, almost 4 months now. That's a very, very, very fiery situation that could explode any moment. Look at what's happening with the Houthis in Yemen on the Red Sea. There, you're talking there about one of the most important chokeways, one of the most important waterways in the world. Roughly 10% of global commerce flows through the Red Sea on the way up to the Suez Canal. You have these third world Islamist slave holding. They literally own slaves, the Houthis, these absolute thugs firing indiscriminately on commercial vessels, committing 21st century piracy. These ships are, speaking of inflation, these ships now have to go down around the southern tip of Africa, below South Africa, just to avoid the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. That gets passed down to consumers. That results in increased prices at the pump and frankly in anything. So now you have this horrible, horrible tragedy. Unfortunately, it's the world's most easily foreseeable tragedy. There's been over 150 attacks from Iran-backed militias operating inside Iraq and Syria against U.S. military base. 150. It might even be 160 by the time that I'm done talking with the sentence here. That's the rate at which it's happening. Over a month ago, around Christmas time, there was an American soldier on a different base who was hit so hard that he entered a coma. He just woke up from his coma, thank God, within the past week. So Joe Biden has no choice. My point is that the war is there, and I'm not calling for bombs dropping inside Tehran. I think that's a very bad idea. On the contrary, but you have to do something. You have to strike back at these militias inside Syria and Iraq. You probably have to strike back at the Houthis much harder than you've done in Yemen, and you might also consider taking the fight more directly to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon as well. All of these groups are the various tentacles of the Iranian regime. They are the head of the snake. They call the shots when it comes to all of this chaos currently afflicting the region.
Now, I can tell you, Iran was demoralised and isolated under the Trump administration. It's been emboldened by the Biden administration, and I think that situation is only going to get worse in the coming months. On that tragedy with the loss of life there, Joe Biden's spokesman John Kirby was asked if the president will attend the dignified transfer of the US troops killed by those Iranian proxies. This was his response.
John, do you expect the president would go to Dover for the dignified transfer when these Americans are returned to the United States?
I don't have anything on his schedule to speak to.
Now, that's just not good enough. The president must be there, and this time he should refrain from looking at his watch. I just think that should not even be a question. He has to be there for that. Now, let's talk about the illegal immigration crisis. It's worsening under the Biden administration. Record numbers have crossed illegally. And we've just had the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision side with the Biden administration, directing Texas to allow federal border agents access to the Mexico border where the state had deployed razor wire. You wrote a brilliant article arguing that Texas has the right to interpret the Constitution independently amid Biden's failure to secure the border. Tell me more about this. And I talked earlier about this split in the US. We've now got 24 Republican governors pledging to stand with Texas, to stand with Governor Greg Abbott.
So first of all, an astonishing ruling from the United States Supreme Court. 5-4 decision, and basically saying that Border Patrol can go down there and physically take down barriers that Texas put up. Unfortunately, it wasn't just John Roberts, our very mercurial swing justice, but it was also Amy Coney Barrett, unfortunately, the Trump nominee who voted with the left there, which is part of a very troubling trend, by the way, Rita. If Trump does retake office come this November, which I hope that he does, we're going to have to do a lot better, actually, than Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh. They're right more often than they're wrong, but neither is Clarence Thomas, neither is Sam Alito. But table that for another day. Yeah. When it comes to the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border, look, it's very straightforward. So America has a unique constitutional system. It was drafted in 1787. It's since been duplicated in many ways throughout the world. We basically have a system of dual spheres of sovereignty, where both the national government and the 50 state governments are themselves sovereign entities within their own legitimate spheres of influence. What that means at the state level is that the states have the right to exclude. The right to exclude is the very defining feature of sovereignty. The late great Justice Antonin Scalia explicated this at great length in his brilliant writing in a 2012 case called Arizona versus United States, where then we were dealing with an illegal immigration crisis, not in Texas, but in Arizona. And what Scalia asked then is, he said, if Arizona does not have the right to secure its borders when the federal government, then the Obama administration, when they failed to do so, then Arizona ceases to be a sovereign state. And when you contemplate the fact that it was actually the 50 states in America that created the national government, our national government is one of strictly enumerated powers. They were the ones who created the government in the first place. They never would have bothered to create this whole national government if you would give the national government the idea that they could intrude and tell you who to let in when thousands, hundreds of thousands are flooding in over the course of a month, 2 months, however long the time. So it's just utterly insane there. But I do feel compelled to make one important distinction. What the court actually said is that U.S. Border Patrol has the right to go in and to snip this razor wire that Texas has put up. They did not say anything about whether Texas can actually put up new razor wire. So I think that Greg Abbott and his Department of Public Safety are well within their rights to do exactly that. And the most important part here, Rita, Biden's going to blink. He's bluffing, because his approval rating on the immigration issue here in America is -25, -30. He is not going to risk a grand showdown against the big red state, the state of Texas, joined, as you said, by 24 other Republican governors. He's ultimately going to bluff. Greg Abbott should call that bluff, and he stands to benefit politically from it.
Now, Joe Biden's border czar, Kamala Harris, recently sat down with Katie Couric and listen to this weapon-grade chutzpah from Harris, who said, "We would lose this democracy if we elect a president who would weaponize the Department of Justice and go after their political enemies." She was talking about Trump, not Biden there. Let's have a look.
November of 2024, binary. And on the other side, you've got someone who has said that if he were back in office, he would weaponize the Department of Justice. Someone who has openly applauded insurrectionists as patriots. Someone who has said that they will go after their political enemies and applauds dictators, indicating that he would be one. So let's be really clear about what's at stake. And then, yes, of course, there is then a desire that let's get out there, because we can't lose this democracy.
You know what? I don't know if chutzpah covers it. I mean, that is just extreme gaslighting and projection, considering what's happening in the US right now. Before I let you go, Josh, let's have a look at this Saturday Night Live skit. This mob are not just painfully unfunny, but utterly clueless.
Hasn't lost a step. Trump did have a slight stumble this week while talking about banks, and he introduced an interesting new term called Debank.
We're also going to place strong protections to stop banks and regulators from trying to debank you. They want to debank you, and we're going to debank.
don't know what the hell Debank means, but he might have to take D-ambulance to see the doctor.
Josh, it appears that they think Trump invented the term debank, that it's just some figment of his imagination. How could they be so clueless to what's happened in just the last couple of years?
Yeah, Rita, some of us have been writing about this problem for, at least 4 or 5 years now. I mean, this term has been around in discourse for a while. It happens to point to an extraordinarily troubling phenomenon, by the way, which is where, we've seen it time and time again. Bank of America a few years ago stopped taking as customers new Second Amendment, new gun rights organizations. I think the NRA found its own banking account sapped from the Bank of America, if I remember correctly. Some figures on the right, like Laura Loomer, have been totally sapped of their access to PayPal and Venmo and various other financial intermediaries like that. This is a big problem because what you're dealing here with people's access to capital. You're dealing with people's ability to save, to invest, to take out loans, to build businesses, ultimately to build the means with which to thrive and to flourish and to pass down intergenerational wealth, God willing, to their children. So this is very, very serious stuff. It's actually a heck of a lot even more serious, I think, than deplatforming, which is kind of its analog when it comes to big tech. Deplatforming is a real concern, to be clear, but you're talking there about something that's a little less than your literal livelihood. It's similar because a lot of people make their living on these platforms. I'm not trying to downplay it, but the point is that debanking is a really, really big problem. I've been writing about it for a while. Like I said, I think a lot of the same remedies for deplatforming actually apply there. I think common carrier regulation, treating these guys as public utilities, which is not necessarily my first choice of remedy. That's not necessarily kind of the more limited government answer, but unfortunately it might be necessary. But regardless what the remedy is, this term has been around for a long time. And I'm actually personally very happy that Donald Trump is talking.
And in the last couple of years, it really became very much a mainstream term because we saw what happened with the Canadian truckers, the way that was used as a weapon against them, debanking. So for everyone on the Saturday Night Live team, from the presenters to the writers and producers, for all of them to somehow be clueless about this phenomenon is disturbing. Josh Hammer, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rita.